Hi, I will introduce myself now that I've sufficiently talked into the microphone. My name is Claire Grenier. I'm a research assistant on Crossing Fonds. I'm a master's student at OCAD in the Criticism and Curatorial Practice program, and I will be moderating today's panel of student presentations. Great work. So first, we have a few presentations on Latin American community archiving. So our first one is Ellen Colín-Arce. Arce. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alan. I'm a first-year master's student in sociology at the University of Victoria. And today I'll be discussing two projects I worked in when I was doing my undergrad in Mexico, and especially about the feminist student movement that happened at my university, at my previous university, the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico, in the city of Toluca, which is 1 hour away from Mexico City. And so in Mexico, there's a very strong feminist movement. And one of the things that characterizes it is that they organize protests throughout the year, especially in symbolic dates such as International Women's Day. And as part of the protest, activists create these, what in Spanish we call pintas, which can be translated to feminist graffiti, such as the one that you see in the first image on the slide. And this graffiti, sorry about that. And so the graffiti that is created is the one that you see in the first image. And this type of graffiti is ephemeral in nature because of the medium. Graffiti paint is obviously can be easily deteriorated by the weather, for example, but it is also ephemeral because government authorities and government workers erase this graffiti hours after the protest. So if the protest takes place in the afternoon, by the night, there are government workers cleaning this graffiti. And so the only traces that remain of this graffiti are maybe photographs taken either by the activists or by journalists and published in social media or in newspapers. But if you go to the place where the protest happened the next day, it might seem that nothing happened there because the graffiti was erased the night before. And so as a way to document and preserve these type of protest expressions, I collaborated in these two projects. One was a digital archive and the other one was a web archive on about first the student feminist movement that was happening, but then it expanded to the feminist movement in general that was happening in the city of Toluca. And so the first project, the digital archive, is called in Spanish Huellas Incómodas, which can be translated to uncomfortable traces or uncomfortable footprints. And it was an archive created on Omeka, and it contains around 250 crowdsourced records of the feminist movement in Toluca from 2020 to 2022. And the way we get these images is first through crowdsourcing, so activists can submit their own images of the graffiti, of the protest, and they add the metadata themselves. They add the title, the description, the author, and it can be uploaded also anonymously or with a pseudonym if they don't want to reveal their identity. And after it is verified by a member of the team, it is made publicly available. And another way that we've been getting images is by collaborating with journalists who generously share their images with us, and they are posted on the website with a Creative Commons license. And another part of the project is creating timelines and maps to trace the evolution of the movement through time and space. And the second project is a web archive created on Archive It. It contains 108 archived news stories from local and national news sites. And even though these news sites were not created by the activists, they can still be a good way of tracking the responses of the university and of local authorities to the movement. And over 70% of the websites that are on the archive are from local news sites. And these sites are more likely to disappear. They are less likely to be found on the Wayback Machine, for example. But they are the ones that cover the most the local movements, they are more at risk of disappearing, like most of these records. And preserving in the archive is one way of avoiding them from being lost if the news site shuts down, for example, because they have less money. And so with these two projects, one of the goals was to challenge, first of all, the removal of feminist demands from public spaces, which happens really quickly. As I said, like it can happen in less than one day, the graffiti is erased. And the second thing that it challenges is the centralization of activism and preservation, because Mexico is a very centralized country. And so the activism that happens in the capital receives a lot of media attention. It is more likely to be found in archives. But this project is a reminder that there is activism happening in smaller cities in Mexico, and that it also should be paid attention to and preserved. And that will be all for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So next in our series on Latin American archival approaches, we have, I believe this is a video from Ester Bovard from the University of Amsterdam. And so she is doing a project called Hierarchies of Visibility, mapping El Salvador's audiovisual archives in the digital landscape. So bear with us while we get it set up, but thank you very much. And we're gonna have everyone do their presentations, and then we're gonna take questions as a group at the end. So take notes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ester Bovard. I am a recent graduate of the Master's Program in Preservation and Presentation of the Moving Image at the University of Amsterdam. To give you some context, when I first started researching my thesis, I was aiming to conduct a much broader study of audiovisual preservation in El Salvador, but I was quickly struck by how difficult it was to find information. The more I dug into sources online, the more it seemed like these resources just didn't exist. El Salvador has no national cinematheque, and it is very difficult to access information about what resources might be held in the national archives, libraries, and universities. Finally, one day, almost ready to give up, in the references to a Wikipedia article, I found a solitary broken link to a collection of recordings of digitized radio broadcasts at the University of Texas. These broadcasts were from Radio Venceremos, the guerrilla radio station that was arguably the main source of on-the-ground reporting during the country's civil war in the 1980s. Unfortunately, even as a directed searcher accessing the website directly, it proved quite difficult to find the collection. However, determined and maybe a little desperate to find something, I waded through a sea of broken links, finally discovering a rich source of information in the library's specialized collections. It was here that I learned that El Salvador does in fact have an established audiovisual archive, not within any state-sanctioned organization, but within a citizen-led initiative called the Museo de la Palabra y la Imagen, or MUPI for short. Investigating further, I discovered that in addition to the digitized collections of broadcasts at the University of Texas, MUPI had participated in the digitization of over 200 films in their collection through a long-term digital preservation project in partnership with the Indiana University Library. In addition to digitizing their collections for long-term digital preservation, these items had been made openly accessible via the online streaming platform Archivo Mesoamericano nearly 20 years earlier. So I had to ask myself, why were these resources so difficult to find? Had marginalized audiovisual archives in El Salvador been empowered by the advent of global archival digitalization, or had they found themselves further disenfranchised by the encroachment of the digital landscape? Had the democratization and access promised by the digital archival turn come to bear, or have the power dynamics of the past simply been reproduced on an even greater and exponentially growing scale? Taking an empirical approach to the examination of these questions, I applied a methodology based on the principles of systematic search analysis to examine the visibility of audiovisual archival resources within and related to El Salvador and its culture, history, and politics. Building on the work of scholars exploring the significance and effect of institutionalized bias and data absence in the digital sphere, and in light of increasingly commercialized and automated processes of data organization online, this methodology was based upon the most common methods of online search. Given that methods differ based on the background and goals of the researcher and the impossibility of conducting an exhaustive review of every type of digital search available, for the purposes of this study, researchers were classified into three types: casual researchers using Google, academic researchers using WorldCat, and informed researchers attempting to connect with known resources in a more targeted fashion. For the first two categories, the results returned by a defined set of search terms in both English and Spanish were examined for relevance, posting location, and the location in which the material contained was created. The category of informed researcher posed the greatest challenge to the construction of a systematic search plan and necessitated a slightly more anecdotal and open-ended approach. Presuming an informed searcher to have knowledge of the existence of MUPI, the Archivo Mesoamericano, and the digitized collection at the University of Texas, I sought to document the researcher's desktop experience of attempting to directly access these resources. I also documented the current functionality of the digital interfaces connected to El Salvador's national archival organizations in order to ascertain the possibility of accessing audiovisual archival records related to the country's history and cinematic culture through official government channels. Reviews of both casual and academic search were found to be revealing of international hierarchies of visibility and the digital entrenchment of colonial power dynamics. Google searches were dominated by results in the global north, regardless of relevance. While returning more relevant results, WorldCat search results were almost entirely limited to records found in repositories in the United States or elsewhere in the global north. These results were especially disheartening considering MUPI's efforts to digitalize their collections and take advantage of various digital platforms in order to share their holdings. In turn, reviewing the experience of more informed searchers was more revealing of the power of the power dynamics at work within the country itself. Official national institutions in El Salvador remained largely inaccessible online, while the citizen-led MUPI's resources were far more accessible. While MUPI has been able to utilize digital avenues to subvert the power of the National Archive system, the organization struggles to maintain visibility in the global digital landscape. Audiovisual archives in El Salvador are fighting a battle on two fronts, against the archival censorship and silencing of the past, and the reproduction of systemic imbalances of power and visibility online. Taking a step back to survey the greater global digital landscape, it is becoming clear that while the advent of digitalization presents exciting opportunities for the future of audiovisual archives, it also risks perpetuating systemic bias and imbalance in the archival canon and poses serious questions regarding the long-term sustainability of both preservation and access. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, so our next group is on North American queer and trans archives, and we will be starting with Sky Dragushan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sky Dragushan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm completing my BA in art history at the University of Victoria. This past term, I've been researching the FTM newsletter, an archival publication running from the late 80s to the early 2000s as a Lowndes Fellow in Special Collections. Before I begin, I wanted to give a brief territory acknowledgement and provide a bit of background as to my own positionality within this research. I grew up in Toronto, located on the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabeg, and Wendat Nations. At 18, I moved away from home to attend the University of Victoria, located on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen, Songhees, Esquimalt, and WSÁNEĆ nations. Today, we all stand on SFU campus in Surrey, located on the territories of the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Katsi, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Thank you. I'm really grateful to be able to do this work here on this land in this time. As a non-binary transgender person, it really means a lot that this resource is available to be accessed for free on the UVic Archives website. There's no paywall or anything, and I recognize that that is a privilege that not everyone has. So the letters FTM of the FTM newsletter stand for female to male and refer to a person born female who is either fully transitioned to a male or is in the process of transitioning to a male gender identity. Created by Lou Sullivan and later taken over by Jameson Green in 1991, the FTM newsletter ran from 1987 to 2008. Issues were published quarterly by FTM International, and there was a total of 67 issues. During the mid to late 80s and throughout the 90s, it was legal just about everywhere for your employer to fire you because you were trans, for your landlord to refuse to house you because you were trans. So secrecy and care were really important. And because of that, it was really easy for trans folk, especially transmasculine folk, to feel really alone and to feel really isolated. So FDM's provision of newsletters discussing transmasculine issues, articles, film reviews, providing services that trans folk might be interested in, providing ads for products trans folk might be interested in was really important and needed at that time. And throughout my research, I have come across again and again of men in that era and now saying, you know, FTM was a lifeline. I met my partner through FTM. I met my best friends through FTM. It was so important, and that really hammered that home for me. The volunteers producing this newsletter didn't make any money. Every cent received from patrons went right back into buying paper, ink, and stamps for the next issue. The earliest mentions of the internet in this publication was January 1995, or issue number 29. And from there, FTM continued to use digital spaces to build trans community online and to increase access to content that up until 1995 had only available via print to paying patrons, physically available. And the volunteers working with ftmi.org, which now is only accessible via the Internet Archive, unfortunately, digitized some content from previous issues as well. So it was clear that although they were putting new content onto this website, they were also using it as a repository for previous content and previous issues. And something that I found really interesting throughout all the issues is that, especially post 1991, when Jameson Green took over the newsletter, there were full page articles, sometimes front page, where they would say, this is what's going on with the newsletter. These people are having to take a break. These people are taking over. We were producing it at this guy's house, and now we're producing it over here. We have this office space, and this is what we want to do with the space. And it was really clear that with the radical transparency that they were trying to involve everyone in the transmasculine community with this newsletter, with this community publication. And it's also really clear that they knew what they were doing. They knew that this was going to be so important. They knew that it was important. They knew that they had to document this process. And it was very convenient for me as a researcher to go back and go, oh, here, and here is exactly the timeline. They laid it all out for me. And I think that really speaks to the significance and the radicalness of this newsletter and what they were doing, especially because reading all of these was sometimes really difficult, because they would print about deaths in the community. They would say, you know, this person committed suicide, this person was bullied to death. It was very, very hard. But I think that the presence of FTM at all really the presence of FTM at all really speaks to, in the face of latent misogyny, gender discrimination, really speaks to how radical it was, and the intent really there from Lou Sullivan, from Jameson Green, from all the volunteer teams that were running it. And for me, the FTM newsletter represents transmasculine community, liberation, visibility, and love. And I'm proud that I was able to share a chapter of trans history with you all today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have someone from Emily Carr University, Sabid Ali, who's going to be presenting Activating Queer Archives, the Currency of Queer Material Culture.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sabid Ali. The name of our presentation is Activating Queer Archives, the Currency of Queer Material Culture. I'd like to do a land acknowledgement, understanding that my research was conducted mostly at Emily Carr, University of Art and Design, situated on the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Also, a lot of my research was conducted in the city of Toronto, as a city I call my home, and it is the home of the Credit First Nation, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe of the Huron-Wendat. And the territory consists of ceded land covered under the Toronto Treaty 13 of the Upper Canada Land Surrenders and the Williams Treaties. as well as the unceded land that continues to be contested to this day. I especially consider and acknowledge the history and presence of settler colonialism, in addition to the two-spirit, queer, and trans Indigenous folks who continue undoing the violence of settler colonialism. My positioning is that I'm a visual designer from Toronto, Ontario. It's somewhere I comfortably juggle expressions of myself as being gay, Bangladeshi Canadian, and it is one of the largest LGBTQ neighborhoods in the world. It's also the home of the Archives, which are the largest independent queer archive in the world. And somewhere I conducted the majority of my research. My design practice includes activating archives and replicating the body practices of designers I've seen before me to put queer designers' work back into current queer consciousness and the canon of graphic design. And this all ties together with my method of making things, quite simply. I love making, I love designing, and I hope to share some of my projects with you here today. My journey begins in Vancouver, where I traveled to Toronto to visit the archives last year, came back and visited the BC Gay and Lesbian Archives in May, made a second trip to Toronto, and just decided to survey as many examples of queer material culture as possible. I continued in Montreal to the Quebec Gay Archives and made a second trip in Vancouver when I arrived back home, and then also visited the UVic Transgender Archives in July of last year. With that, I took everything that I looked at and created my own archival genres to step away from categories and how I understood queer material culture as it had been allocated in and preserved in queer archives. And from this, I came to a single piece of ephemera that I actually saw on my first trip to the archives in Toronto. It's a double-sided catalog flyer for stamp designs. I later learned that stamp designs and stamps, rubber stamps, were used to stamp on money and to brandish money with a queer economic power to demonstrate the contributions of queer people. And this news article, for instance, was taken from the late 70s, but my research uncovers a history where these social movements and this movement of stamping money and making it or read as queer money kind of dipped in and out of news headlines. But certainly to me, it was a new find, and it was something that was new and exciting and something that I had never known before. And I chose to take what I learned in the archives, such as the paste-up board that you're seeing on the left. It's just a paste-up board for how the design and logo for the Body Politic, one of the first queer newspapers in Canada, and that came out of Toronto, how this administrative stamp was designed. And then wanting to have a slower relationship with that single piece of ephemera, I created a small book and replicating the stamps that I had seen to better understand the material conditions under which these social movements kind of dipped in and out of history, and just experimented with stamping on my own. But then again, wanting to put these stories into the current queer consciousness and make these stamps real, I used rapid fabrication techniques to create the first 9 stamps. The first 9 stamps in that piece of ephemera are sized 1 inch by 1 inch. They're some of the smallest, and understanding queer material culture, I understood these as being kind of the most covert and ones that could be most accessible. And they were the cheapest, actually. The smaller stamps were the cheapest on the piece of ephemera for order. So really understanding, again, the material conditions under which activists organized, under which they innovated using design. And then I created these prints of the stamp designs, and especially it was important for me to print them on sizes of the American dollar bill to understand them again for scale, and creating this sheet of specimens of stamp designs and understanding where the semiotics and language of queer history, how we understand it today, where it comes from, and again, those material conditions that allowed this movement to proliferate. And again, I was able to create these stamps 1 inch by 1 inch through our rapid fabrication labs in Emily Carr, and just using some scrap pieces of wood to fashion these stamps together, to create some stamps of my own and to be able to have these conversations. This is just a small part of the research I conducted studying queer material culture at Emily Carr. Our grad night show is coming up this coming May, and I would love to invite you all to come visit the work that we've put together and the work that I've done and the research that I've done to talk about currency of queer material culture, and how I've chosen to activate archives in my past couple years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sabid. Next, we have a virtual presentation, and we're moving on to the subheading of Asian Canadian diasporas in British Columbia. So first up, we have Jocelle Refol and Kathleen and Zaragosa. Their presentation is Kuwentong, Pamamahay, Stories of Place, Homemaking in the Filipinx Diaspora in Vancouver.
So hello everyone, good afternoon, magandang hapon. Today we are presenting Kuwentong Pamamahay, or Stories of Homemaking in Vancouver's Filipinx community. We're excited to be sharing a snapshot here of our oral history project in progress and how it came to be. And to start, a quick disclaimer, in lieu of more common terms like Filipino and Filipina, we're using the term Filipinx here to be inclusive of, but more importantly, to interrogate how queer, non-binary, and transgender people of Philippine descent who use the X identity marker experience harm and shame while asserting themselves within our community. A brief introduction to us. My name is Kathleen. I graduated with my BA at UBC in 2021, and I'm currently at the Ontario Institute for Studies and Education, pursuing a Master of Art degree with a focus on Philippine language learning in Canada.
And my name is Jocelle, and I graduated with my Bachelor of Health Sciences from Simon Fraser University in 2022, and I'm currently at Dalhousie School of Public Health at the University of Toronto pursuing my Master of Public Health. Kathleen and I were both born and raised in Greater Vancouver as children of Filipinx immigrants, and we are here as members of Slice Mango Collective, a grassroots organization that centers Filipinx identity and cultures. And as an all-youth team, we aim to bring a sense of belonging and provide a space in Greater Vancouver for Filipinx youth like us to convene and connect with their roots in the Philippines.
Soon after Slice Mango was established at the start of 2021, our team spearheaded an awareness campaign towards a block of Filipinx food businesses, a beloved cultural hub in the Joyce Collingwood neighborhood, put under threat for displacement over city redevelopments. Long story short, this also led to the start of our partnership with Heritage Vancouver Society, who featured the Filipinx Food Hub and our advocacy in their event series that discussed examples of intangible cultural heritage in the city. The first event that we collaborated on was called Listening Room, where Filipinx community members were invited to share what Joyce Collingwood and the Food Hub meant to them, and the public were invited to share this place to share and to understand in this place from their perspectives. Since the start of our work with HVS, we realized the value and the power of stories in reframing the way our community understands heritage. Especially in our culture, it is shaped by our living histories, the stories that we pass down and share with each other. Through this, the idea for Kuwentong Pamamahay was born. Our current project is a natural extension of Slice Mango's partnership with HVS, along with UBC's ACAM program and the Public Humanities Hub. So to break down the title, Cuento is the Tagalog word for stories, and it's also the act of verbal storytelling. As a mode of actively constructing heritage and cultural knowledge, exchanging these stories is the oral history tradition of the Philippines, a tradition that has found its iterations and practices despite centuries of colonization. Pamamahay can be understood as making both a physical and social space feel like home, which is closely linked to the act of placemaking, to shape places and communities to ones of belonging. So as an oral history archive, Kuwentong Pamamahay highlights the presence of traditional Filipinx values among the Vancouver diaspora today. Our project presents unique Filipinx Canadian modes of community building around Pamamahay through intangible cultural aspects like food, religion, art, and also expressions of national and bicultural identity. These acts of storytelling and homemaking are what our research design aimed to capture and are bridged together by the core value of kapwa. In Filipinx psychology, to have kapwa is to recognize the unity and oneness of a person with other people. It is a shared inner self, and to be guided by kapwa is the essence of being Filipinx. This is the foundation of our interview process. Our story makers are recruited members of the team that play both interviewee and interviewer. In other words, we share some of our stories as Filipinx Canadians, then we get to pass the mic to other people we know in the community to share their stories as storytellers.
In using our methods, our 4 story makers have collected 15 stories from storytellers across the BC Lower Mainland, These Filipinx community members span across generations and experiences, ranging from those immigrating at an early age to those who have settled in multiple places across Canada, to those who even just spent their entire life in BC. And so with the plethora of stories, storymakers are now conducting thematic analysis based on the questions asked during the interviews with the mentorship of Dr. JP Cantongol from UBC ACAM. And sections of these stories will be highlighted in vignettes as part of our knowledge sharing portion of this project, emphasizing key aspects of each person's stories, whether they be similar or different from other storytellers. And the entirety of the interviews will be archived online, either on video, audio, and on transcript, depending on the participants' preferences. And throughout this process, as storymakers ourselves, we've gained many insights. The first being the importance of preserving our cultural history through traditional ways of storytelling, because Filipinos love to talk and share with each other. And especially since this project is intersectional, spanning generational status, age, gender, and more, this process of archiving stories of our community has been a powerful way for us to understand and connect with our culture as youth. And so even more so, the role of Kapwa has been really key, with the involvement of Filipinx community from the beginning has allowed for the project's methods to be community informed and led. And also having, Filipinx community members involved as part of the KP team, such as ourselves as Filipinx youth storymakers, it challenges the notion of an outsider coming into the community to gather these stories. And instead, with a shared sense of identity, the interviews between storymakers and storytellers are more informal and comfortable, since we are grounded in the lived experiences of being Filipinx, despite how different our experiences may be, and fundamentally, that is essential to the development of this oral history community archive. And so for next steps following analysis, the hope is that the physical and social spaces that are mentioned by storytellers are then visually placed on a map of the Lower Mainland for us to get a better understanding of what this looks like for our community. And you can see this, so the storytellers vignettes and more at our launch event, which I will plug, which has been scheduled for Saturday, June 1st, 2024 at UBC Robson Square from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., which is also the start of Filipino Heritage Month. So if you or anyone else may be interested in attending and hearing our stories, you can register online. If you're on the Zoom, you can find it in the chat. But if you just search Kuwentong Pamamahay UBC ACAM, you'll be able to find that as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, up next, let me just double check. We have Chiara D'Abreu from the University of Victoria. Yes. Fraser Valley, University of Fraser Valley. And the project is Let the Day Come When They Will See Clearly the Interests of All Workers, mapping the social histories of Muslim immigrants of South Asian origin in British Columbia.
Hello, my name is Chiara D'Abreu, and I'm a second-year student at the University of Fraser Valley, UFV. And I'm a second-year student in doing a BA, and I'm specializing in history. I work as a research assistant at the South Asian Studies Institute, SASI, at UFV. And I worked on this project, Let the Day Come When They Will See Clearly the Interests of All Workers, mapping the social histories of Muslim immigrants of South Asian origin in British Columbia. This is a quote by Hussein Rahim. He was one of Canada's earliest Muslim immigrants from India, and he arrived in 1910. So despite their profound and multifaceted history, South Asian Muslims have frequently been marginalized in traditional archival collections. This presentation talks about the application of critical archival methods to document these narratives and acknowledge their history. So the documentation of South Asian Muslim experiences have been hindered by systemic challenges within traditional archival practices. These challenges manifest in the selective preservation of narratives where certain stories are prioritized over others based on predefined criteria. As a result, there is a lack of equity and representation in the preserved stories, which shapes a historical narrative that overlooks the varied and nuanced experiences within the community. Moreover, limited access to resources, language barriers, and a lack of community engagement further extends this issue. Archival materials are primarily in English, which excludes individuals who may not be proficient in the language from accessing and contributing to these records. And as for community engagement, a lack of community engagement creates a divide or a disconnect between the archival institutions and the communities they seek to represent. Critical archival methods, they offer a transformative approach to address these limitations. At the core of it is a commitment to inclusivity, community engagement, and a recognition of diverse voices. This empowers communities to shape the historical discourse on their own terms. Oral history documentation, it offers a platform for individuals to share their experiences in their own words by centering on empowerment and reclamation, participatory approaches, decolonization frameworks, and metadata justice. Critical archival methods, they challenge the biases and they ensure each voice within a community is heard and valued, and which is especially important to remember since even within every community, there are a multitude of diverse backgrounds. Ethical considerations are important in the preservation of migration stories. Principles such as confidentiality, anonymity, inclusivity, informed representation, and integrity, they guide our actions and decisions. So by sticking to these, we can create archives that respect everyone's rights and help the public understand the communities in BC better. And by creating an accessible archive, it involves more than just technical considerations. It requires us to reevaluate traditional archival methods and prioritize ethical principles. So by utilizing interactive digital exhibits, audio descriptions, transcripts, plain language summaries, captions, and translations, we can ensure our archives are easily navigable and engaging for a wide audience in multiple languages such as Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, and so on. So in conclusion, the creation of an accessible archive is a complex endeavor and it requires a holistic approach. By incorporating critical archival methods, upholding ethical considerations and embracing inclusivity, we can build archives that reflect the diversity and richness of British Columbia's history. So they'll serve as platforms for understanding, appreciating, and connecting with the diverse histories present in this province. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we have our last presentation of today's student presentations. And this is by Raina Madan, also from the University of Fraser Valley, now that I have it correct. And your project is archiving South Asian Canadian identities, representation, and interdisciplinary dialogue through a psychological lens, correct? Alrighty.
Can everyone hear me? Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm Raina Madan, and I'm here to share my combined experience as a research assistant for the South Asian Canadian Digital Archive and my personal academic background in psychology. I am a third-year BA student right now in my undergrad, and I am here to combine these experiences to emphasize on the importance of psychological frameworks and its integration in the archival practices to ensure an inclusive and equitable representation of a heavily marginalized community like that of the South Asian Canadians in this nation. So just sit tight while this presentation takes you on a journey through the history of my community. The South Asian Canadian narrative is one that is deeply intertwined in the history of this nation. From the early 20th century, when the Sikh pioneers first arrived to help with the railroads, to the vibrant tapestries of industries like the lumber, sawmill, fishing, and the enterprising spirit that defines BC and Canada today, this community has been a cornerstone for growth and development. But this history has also been woven in threads of struggles. Many South Asians in Canada, like myself, have descended from generations who have faced marginalization, discrimination, and a relentless fight for equality. These struggles are not just present in historical accounts, but in lived experiences passed down through families, continuing the cycle of intergenerational trauma. All these pictures that you see here are from archival records of archival records, photographs, personal accounts of South Asian Canadians for generations to see and honor the struggle that it took for me to even be standing in front of you all, freely expressing myself in a foreign nation. One such powerful symbol of this struggle is the Komagata Maru tragedy. In 1914, a ship carrying over 300 South Asian immigrants was denied entry into Canada. The passengers had to go through months-long ordeal, many ultimately forced back into their homelands or take perilous journeys elsewhere. Within these time constraints, I certainly cannot do justice to retelling this story, and I would deeply encourage you all to look up the Sagda archival records to get the whole picture. However, what I can tell you is that this tragedy stands as a stark reminder of the historical exclusionary policies working against marginalized community and the resilience that this community has, despite all these struggles, maintaining its position as Canada's fastest growing cultural group. Now, we all know the power that archives hold in amplifying marginalized communities. However, they can also perpetuate harm, especially in case of historical injustices, if they inaccurately represent the experiences and colonial narratives of these communities. Being a psychology major, deeply interested in the South Asian Canadian experience, I'm exploring how we can integrate psychological approaches into archival practices. Here's how we can do it. Trauma-informed approaches. Essentially, they equip us with sensitivity to understand the lasting impact of tragedies like the Komagata Maru. It creates a space where archives acknowledge the emotional weight of the experiences and not just the mere facts. This is the goal, to create archives that are sensitive and respectful of the communities that they are representing. The Komagata Maru collection at Sagda not only provides the fact of the tragedy, but the discriminatory laws, the influential institutions, and the personal accounts of each and every individual involved in this tragedy, painting a full picture of what occurred and the lasting impact that it created. Now let's talk more about integrating these narratives. Narrative inquiry is another psychological tool that uses letters, diaries, or oral histories and personal accounts to understand the emotional landscape of these historical events. The essence of narrative inquiry is to breathe life into archival records using personal stories. And all these quotes that you can see here on the slide are from our community members expressing a sense of fulfillment and belonging in being represented to the world. And it not just works one way. Our team at Sagda have had numerous encounters of people stumbling across our digital archive and identifying and discovering their own family members and writing to us about it. This kind of personal representation not only means a lot to them, but also to us because it provides us with a new perspective on our records and the individuals that are involved, creating a more nuanced picture of the South Asian experience. But analyzing these narratives from a distance is not enough. Through community collaboration, we can ensure archives are not just repositories of the past, but spaces where representation is accurate and voices are heard. By collaboration, we can organize exhibits, conduct oral history interviews, and develop educational resources that foster empathy and cultural sensitivity. One such example is this documentary by Hina Man, our research coordinator, who sat down with the Gill family from our Where Are the Women exhibit collection, and these people described in their own words the struggles of being the first immigrant generation of the family. So now all these psychological frameworks that I talk about can be integrated into the archival practices to ensure responsible representation of marginalized communities in the future. This is the future that I'm working towards, one where the South Asian experiences are woven into the fabric of our collective history. A future where archives are platforms for understanding, inclusivity, and celebration of all the voices that make Canada who we are. Thank you.
Thank you so, so much. And thank you to all of our presenters. Can we get one more round of applause for the 6 people we heard? We do, in fact, have three whole minutes left in the time slot. So if we have any questions on the Zoom? No? Okay. Do we have any questions in the room? We have Sarah right in the front and we have Jordan. Jordan? What we got?
Hello, my question is for you. I'm sorry, is your name Abir? Sabid. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of going to different archives in Canada you talked about a few of them in different parts of Canada, between the archives and the gay and lesbian, just like what it was like seeing those physical spaces in different parts of the country?
Thank you. It was fantastic. I dipped into archival research with the publication Out North, documenting kinship and queer Canadian archives. So it's a great hardcover book, and it was kind of like one of my first forays into archival research. So it was a priority of mine to visit the archives in Toronto. And then after that, it was just through the community that I was kind of building of archivists around me, and cross-referencing what I had seen in person with what I was looking at digitally, and keeping those lines of communication open. So yeah, from that, I visited the archives in Montreal, Victoria, and again, being in Vancouver, it was a priority of mine to check out the BC Gay and Lesbian Archives, and learn more through the NFB documentary Unarchived as well. And it was really important again for me to kind of inform myself and educate myself before I dipped into that research, and certainly seeing those physical spaces and was important to me. But what was even more important to me was keeping in touch with the community of archivists there, so that it could back up what I was learning. Because kind of like to tie it all up is because my trips to those archives were pretty short. They're, half a day if I was lucky. But yeah, to be able to understand what I looked at better in those couple hours, it was important for me to see those archives in person and keep in touch with the archivists.
I have 2 questions. I have a question for Kira. Kira, you used a term I thought was super interesting, which was metadata justice. Could you talk a little bit about the concept of metadata justice? Because it seems very relevant to the conversations that we've been having today.
So just basically metadata justice is like data about data. So like if you upload something on an archive, so like just information about it, like so say like when the file was created, what like some keywords about it or something, like just like information about it, like keywords.
Okay, thanks. And then I have a question for bless you. For Alan, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about how, I mean, you've built sort of a regional database that seems quite wonderful and with interesting partners. Is that connected to databases and websites, archives in Mexico City? Or are you kind of autonomous in the ways that you're seeing your work? And if you could build a network, how would you go about it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. No, so far, what we did was we collaborated with the University of Kansas in the US, and they helped set up the Omeka site because we couldn't do it at our university because the images were against the university. So of course, we couldn't ask them to host in their servers these images. So we partnered with them. we have been thinking of ways of bringing that content back to Mexican servers. One way we were talking about it, we were approached by the Mexican National Archive to build like a digital exhibition, and we're still talking about it and discussing it to see if it could be possible to share a copy of the metadata with their digital repository to host the metadata there too.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think I will call it there. So we are a little over the allotted time, but if you have any questions for any of the presenters, anyone online, reach out to Sydney to get some things out, to reach into some conversations, or and tonight, perhaps if people are coming out, feel free to have some more conversations at Vivo. Thank you.